You know, I've been watching this scandal. This scandal now, this sex scandal, unlike anything I've ever seen. And just before the camera was going to come on, I thought, I don't want to talk about this the same way everybody else is talking about it. I actually see almost everything from, let's call it a spiritual perspective. I try to look at things a little differently. I'm not really a political person. I mean, I'm fascinated by politics because politics is human nature writ large. And that's what makes me so fascinated with it. And it's history and it's all these things unfolding. But I always see it in a kind of different way. Let me just put this, let me just talk for a minute about religion. Let me talk about Jesus. We're going to talk Jesus. We're going to talk Jesus. You know, when I read the Gospels, I see something in them. I don't think I'm the first person to ever see this in them, but it's not the usual thing. It's not the usual religion, be nice instead of not being nice, do good instead of not being good, don't sleep with this person. I don't actually think that God had to come to earth and die to let us know that we should treat each other nicely. We know that we should treat each other nicely. When I read the Gospels, what I see is a man who is the incarnation of God and who therefore has the consciousness of eternity speaking to us who only have the consciousness of time. And there's all these conversations in the Gospels where Jesus is trying to explain to us that eternity, if you live in eternity in your mind, the world looks a lot different. You don't have to worry about things. You can forgive sins because in eternity, every sin becomes tiny, right? In time, the sin is enormous. But in eternity, it can be forgiven. And you can, you know, he's basically giving you instructions on how to get your mind into eternity. Love your neighbor, love God, forgive. All these things he's telling you are ways to get a mindset, an eternal mindset. And when you can hear Jesus kind of talking to these people, it's almost like he doesn't quite understand us at first. He says things like, you know, Peter tries to walk on the water like Jesus does, and Peter takes a couple of steps and then he sinks, and Jesus says, "Oh, ye of little faith." You think like, really? How much faith do you have to get even 2 steps on the water? You know, I mean, I couldn't take 2 steps on the water. But what Jesus is learning, I think, is he's seeing that we don't have that eternal perspective. In the eternal perspective, the mind is the thing, the consciousness is the thing that dominates, and physical reality like illness just vanishes. It's just, that's how Jesus is constantly healing. Why he's healing? He's showing you that in the eternal perspective, you know, it really, these physical things that we worry so much about don't have as much weight. And that's the whole thing about forgiveness, is you can forgive. You know, the great mystic poet William Blake wrote a line where I'm quoting it from memory, but it's something like, "All throughout eternity, I forgive you and you forgive me." Great line, great couplet of poetry. But in time, no sin goes away. And this is the frustration we have, for instance, that white people sometimes have with black people, right? In time, in history, every sin, every evil bends the arc of history so that it goes in a certain way. And in order to forgive those sins and rise above them, you have to have an eternal mindset. And so each person is an eternal thing. But a society is not. A society lives in time. But each person is an eternal thing. So when blacks say, "Oh, you know, you white folks held slaves," and we say, like, I never had a slave. You know, what are you talking about? You know, my Jews were slaves. How do you like them apples? You know, I mean, so because we're saying that because in eternity we're innocent. Each person is innocent. In time, the arc of society was bent by that evil. It just was. And it was bent by Jim Crow, and it was bent by those things. And in order to lift above it, somebody has to forgive. Somebody has to lift into eternity. What we are seeing now is we are seeing this play out in real time. The things that are coming out right now are the result of 25 years of lies and a society that was trying to, a portion of society that was trying to socially engineer this country into something that it wasn't before. And yes, I am blaming the left and I'm blaming the media. I'm not blaming people for being left-wing, because I think sometimes left-wingers say important things, but I'm blaming a media that tried to black out one side of the equation, because if we talk truthfully to one another, we can compromise, we can forgive each other, we can find a way forward. But when the media just takes over and they have only one perspective, we become wrapped in these lies. 25 years ago, we had a president who was a serial sexual abuser. He was accused, let me put it another way, he was plausibly accused of this. Not just the media, not just the president himself, the president's wife, everyone around him conspired to make that seem like it didn't matter. Bill Bennett had a wonderful comment last night, the commentator Bill Bennett. He said he wrote a book at the time called The Death of Outrage. Where was the outrage at Bill Clinton's crime? And he says, but it turns out outrage wasn't dead. It was just asleep for 25 years. What we're seeing now, and the reason that we're all having such a hard time dealing with these charges that are coming out, is not just because sex is so complex, and it is complex, but also because we were told it didn't matter. And now we're being told it matters because the Clintons are out of the picture, because they were pushed aside. And this very aggressive male figure, Donald Trump, has risen to the presidency, which has been traumatic for some women. Some women look at that guy and they think, oh, that's like that guy who backed me up in a corner and did things to me I didn't like. That's like guys I've dealt with all my life. They look at Donald Trump, and yes, it's women on the left, but still, they look at Donald Trump and they hate the guy and they find it's traumatic. And suddenly they're saying, well, I want to speak about that. And I want to speak about what Harvey Weinstein did to me. And I want to speak about what Charlie Rose did. And all the people who covered up for Bill Clinton are saying, well, okay, then we have to have a reckoning with Bill Clinton. And the people on the right, because nothing disappears in history, no lie, no wrong goes away. People on the right are saying, well, wait, it's too late. It's too late. You can't, I'm not going to ditch my Roy Moore when you didn't ditch your Bill Clinton. And so there's this kind of back and forth. And in order for us to get past this, we're really going to have to take a moral look at ourselves, at all of us. The women, there are women who are out there saying, men are going to have to participate in this, and of course that's true. This is not a sexual thing. The sexual thing is an adjunct of power abuse. I mean, the very same reason that our founders made power disparate. The reason we believe in capitalism is because it makes power disparate. It separates power and means people play power off one another. It's because when power collects, it is abusive, because we're who we are. We're what we are. If we want something and we have the power to take it, we will take it. So, I've just been watching this whole thing unfold and trying to come to my own terms with it, because, let's take Roy Moore for a minute. I don't know. People keep writing me and saying this woman who accused Roy Moore of physically assaulting her when she was young, that now they think that she was lying and Gloria Allred was involved, which always makes everybody look like you're lying. You just have to walk by Gloria Allred. It's like a lie aura is cast over you. You just have to look like, oh, why do I feel like a lie? Oh, they're standing next to Gloria Allred. But the woman who originally made the charge that he had, what's the word I can use? He put his hands on her when she was 14. It was not a non-consensual thing technically, but she was 14, so she had no ability to give informed consent, and he was 32. Her name is Lee Korfman, and she sounds very, reliable. Let's listen to Lee Korfman. She went on TV and she talked about what happened.
I wouldn't exactly call it a date. I'd say it was a meet. At 14, I was not dating. At 14, I was not able to make those kind of choices. I met him around the corner from my house. My mother did not know. And he took me to his home. After arriving at his home, on the second occasion that I went with him, he basically laid out some blankets on the floor of his living room and proceeded to seduce me, I guess you would say. And during the course of that, he removed my clothing. He left the room and came back in wearing his white underwear. And he touched me over my clothing, what was left of it. And he tried to get me to touch him as well. And at that point, I pulled back and said that I was not comfortable, and I got dressed, and he took me home.
So that, that's her story. So, the one thing I will say about Roy Moore is I don't know why people, nobody has come out recently. All this stuff is 30, 40 years ago, and I wonder why Moore didn't just come out if these things are true. If they're true, why he didn't just come out and say, yeah, I was a bad guy, but now I'm not. And I think the voters of Alabama probably would have forgiven that. I don't know what they're going to do now. But people remember when Bill Clinton came out, all these feminists suddenly abandoned their principles and said, we have to protect abortion rights. And now you have guys like Stephen Moore. Stephen Moore, excellent economist, a writer, but he has become a full-fledged Trumper. And Stephen Moore went on and said, well, what about, yes, Roy Moore seems to be kind of a creep, but what about his opponent, Doug Jones?
Democratic candidate is for partial birth abortion in a state that's highly Christian and Catholic. I mean, so there's no moral high ground here between the two candidates.
Well,
I'd simply say,
except that one is except one is an alleged child molester.
Yeah, and the other one is for partial birth abortion, which a lot of people in Alabama think is tantamount to murder.
Which is most people would consider a political position as opposed to, an alleged.
I think, well, look, I was just in Alabama last week, as a matter of fact. I mean, people are really, they're disgusted by Roy Moore's behavior, no question about it. A lot of Republicans have said they're not going to vote for him. But who should make this decision? I mean, I'd ask, you all that question. Who should make the decision? And my argument is people in Alabama should make the decision. If I were living in Alabama, I wouldn't vote for either of these two. I'd vote for, somebody like Jeff Sessions or something like that.
Kellyanne,
But that is actually an argument. The thing that the other, I don't know who the other commentator is untrue. Being for partial birth abortion is a political position if you're a politician. But how many babies would have to be saved before we would say, well, I don't care what Roy Moore did? It's a complicated moral issue, and because of feminism and because of the death of sexual morality since the 60s, it's very hard to make the case. It's very hard to make the case that we all have this kind of consensus of what sexual morality should look like, where we might have more of a consensus that you shouldn't kill babies. I mean, it's like kind of I think that's Moore is not making a completely immoral point. People who are making completely immoral points, guys like this Pastor Earl Wise. I mean, this is one of the things that, evangelical Christians have been traditionally very sexually, rigid. They think this is right and this is wrong and this kind of sex is right. Well, now here's a guy who says, this Pastor Earl Wise, gave an interview. He says, I don't know how much these women are getting paid. These accusers are getting paid, but I can only believe they're getting a healthy sum. Wise said he would support Moore even if the allegations were true and the candidate was proved to have sexually molested teenage girls and women. There ought to be a statute of limitations on this stuff. How these gals came up with this, I don't know. They must have had some sweet dreams somewhere down the line. Plus, there are some 14-year-olds who the way they look could pass for 20. So what I love about this, you talk about a basket of deplorables. This is it's like it never happened and it was a long time ago. It's like it never happened, it was a long time ago. Plus, some of these girls, they're no angels. They're asking for. I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts, and if that's your position, what you're essentially saying is, I will vote for anybody for any reason whatsoever. What Stephen Moore was saying, it's an argument. It's an argument. If he says, look, these are two bad guys, I don't agree with his argument. Just like I didn't agree with the Never Trumpers that you don't vote for anyone. Unfortunately, in a binary choice, I just think that's a weak moral argument. I think it is a weak moral argument not to vote for anyone when one of them is going to win. I think you have to make a choice. Obviously, if you think they're equally bad, if you think what they would do is equally bad, if you think their effect on the country is equally bad, that's different. But even so, I think you have to, if it's a binary choice, you should pay your money and take your choice. Hey, I have to stop, but I want to get on to the fact that this goes beyond sex. I mean, I know that sex is the thing we all love to talk about, but it goes beyond that, and I will talk about that in just a second.